The holidays are a time of cheer and reunion for many families, but can also be a time of mixed emotions. Joining us in studio to give us some tips on how to cope with this holiday season is Dr. Shannon Crawford, psychologist and CEO of Crawford Clinics, as well as the host of the podcast Unlock You with Dr. Shannon Crawford. Doctor, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, as we said, the holidays can present a lot of joy, but can also be challenging for people who are going through a range of emotions.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to get your advice, and we might throw a couple of things at you specifically. But in general, what can people do who are maybe a little overwhelmed by the holidays?
Yeah, I think that the more that we step back and we take time to reflect and honor our emotions, process things in real time, then you can go back fresh. I just had a moment last night. We're celebrating, we're in New York, girlfriends, having fun, and then I just got a wave of grief of missing my mom. And so just taking extra time to process, honor those emotions, and then talk to really good people that love you, and it does feel better.
Now you mentioned, Carrie rather mentioned that you have a podcast where you actually share more about your experiences grieving during the holidays. Can you tell us a little more?
Yeah, I think it's so relatable where we kind of romanticize this time of year, and there's the Hallmark movies, the nostalgia, everything is magical. And then you have a sorrow or loneliness. Some people don't have family, or they don't have people that they can connect with, or they're going through a divorce, or something painful might be happening. So I just want to honor and recognize the people that might not be an easy time. So whether it's therapy or relating with people online or connecting, finding some source where you feel seen and known is really vital this time of year.
Now, I think a very common thing, especially for parents, is they want to make the holidays magical, but there are financial pressures involved with the holidays. So what would you recommend to families or just anybody who may have unrealistic expectations based on their means?
Oh my goodness, that's such a great point, because there's so much comparison where parents feel pressure because they know Johnny's getting this and Sally's getting that. And so I think the more that families can have open conversation and say, hey, we're going to make these gifts and we're going to have this as our big item, and then what can we now share with others? And so making Christmas more about giving rather than just about receiving, I think is really special.
And along the same lines of these type of struggles, it's not just a financial struggle as well. It's a huge time commitment to plan these, whether it's a get-together or getting these presents, all of the holiday shopping. It's a lot of stress, really. How do parents, balance these things and juggle these things? And on the flip side, how can kids learn to understand, that the holidays are sometimes difficult?
Yes, absolutely. So high authority, high warmth, where we engage with the child at their level. Hey, I know this is a dream, this is a desire. Here's the things we can do. And then you show them time blocking. And I think that's a really mature way to introduce kids to realistic expectations. We have this many hours we're awake. Here's the time block where we can work on this, where we can work on this. And then the other things are priorities. What do you want to go in those? And then what do we need to save for another month or another time down the road? So you're inviting them into a mature life skill rather than just saying yes or no, and then they're mad at you, versus understanding the logistics of life.
And you had mentioned recalling a loved one who had passed on and how the emotions come back. For those who are recently grieving, though, when they're in that process, they may not feel like they're ready to be festive or engage in joy necessarily. What would you say to somebody who may have lost an immediate family member or loved one, within the last 2 to 3 months?
I think it's really important to honor those emotions and the reality that that is sorrow and it is loss. I call it an internal board meeting where you imagine different sides of you, and it's like the part that wants to be festive and the part that wants to grieve, and take space and time to say, I'm not ready for that, and that's okay. And so you're kind of making space for all the different sides of you, and then you come back to those traditions when you're ready for it rather than trying to force yourself, and that feels pretty inauthentic.
And I think in these situations, especially when perhaps it's a parent grieving their own parent's loss, it's also a moment to teach their children this type of emotional intelligence, right?
Exactly.
Because parents feel emotions too, but yet they still have to be there for their children. It's not easy.
Oh my gosh, I love that you brought that up, because a lot of times parents try to shield their children from reality. And what that does is the kid intuitively knows something's off. Kids are egocentric, so they assume it's about themselves instead of, hey, mommy's grieving this or daddy is grieving this, and this is what we're feeling and experiencing. And we're going to invite the family into that process. Again, that emotional intelligence and empathy that you're teaching children that the world doesn't doesn't revolve around them. You're not responsible for the parents' marriage, for their emotions, but you can be aware of them and kind and thoughtful and write them cards or invite them into a grieving journey that the family can unite around.
Now we're at a point in our country where it seems like, I believe 50% of marriages do end up in divorce. What would you advise, parents who are divorced and are trying to share children during the holiday season?
Oh my goodness. So the most important, based on research, is that each child, hopefully, I know it's crazy, but if you could get 1 hour every week with each child one-on-one with that parent. So if you could put that, especially in the holidays, because again, there's so much comparison for kids where they're watching intact families versus a 2-home or a 3-home family. And so if they can look at that and say, my mommy puts that 1 hour, I know that's my dedicated time, and my daddy puts this hour, and that's my special one-on-one time, and they're not teaching them, they're not doing anything corrective or like any modeling at that point. It's literally just, I see you and I know you. Then you're filling up the emotional reservoir for that child. And we've seen them become more emotionally robust versus just trying to do activities and shuffle them between, and nobody feels really seen, and they get more cranky, and then they get in trouble, and then the holidays are miserable.
Well, I think another big issue that comes up whether it's Thanksgiving, whether it's Christmas, is the issue of politics, right? Especially with an election year, with the cycle that just went by.
Yes.
They say never to talk about politics at the dinner table, but somehow it always inevitably comes up. How do you advise people to navigate political differences between family members?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that the way that America and every other country, there's beauty in diversity. And unfortunately, people get really triggered in an election year, but we need people to disagree in a harmonious way. And if you feel like you can't do that, then I think a kind, hey, thanks for sharing your opinion. That's not me saying I agree with you, that's me honoring you and the respect you have for your view without engaging and getting baited into a icky moment. But I think there's moments where if it's healthy, we can say, hey, may I share another perspective? Sometimes that goes well, sometimes it doesn't. But I love helping families find that strength of diversity rather than having to all be the same or just disengage. I think that's pretty unhealthy.
Now, doctor, I have heard people tell me, they've had to choose to perhaps cut ties with family members or set boundaries because of these types of disagreements. I want to get your take on that. Is it healthy to be doing that? Because then there's the flip side. People say, everyone has a limited amount of time with their family members on this earth. So it's better to set differences aside, or when others say it's too hard to do. What's your take on that?
Well, I think a lot of pop psychology uses entitlement and emotional severs, and they call it boundaries. So I think we have to be really careful to not allow an entitlement that just because you don't agree with me, that you're no longer valuable to me. We have to be really careful as a society because that's very fracturing. What instead would be more beneficial is reminding yourself this person is important, they're valuable to me as a human being, irrespective of their political views, because we're one family. The more that I can speak to their identity, recognize how great they are with their kids or how well they present their table or what other attributes that are valuable, I think that's more unifying than everybody becoming entitled and prideful and separating. That becomes really dangerous.
And then a question can be tense for some folks, but Christmas is of course the birth of Christ, and for Christians it's a spiritual holiday, and sometimes that gets pushed aside. And then the second part of the question, what should families do who are not Christian but don't want their children or their family to feel left out from the spirit of the holiday season?
Yeah, I think there's a way to still make it magical and lovely and have the Christmas tree and the traditions and all of those things. And you don't have to neglect, if you are a Christian, that's a beautiful part of the heritage and the tradition. And on the other side, just allowing your children to have childlike awe and wonder and the belief that the world is good. And I think that's what the holidays are about, is reminding yourself that there is hope, that there's beauty and there's unity of coming back together, which our question earlier of wouldn't it be beautiful if we could love people even when they have different opinions?
I think it brings up a very important point that the holidays really are about unity and understanding and acceptance. It's really such a special time of the year.
I agree.
Now, in terms of kind of moving to health now, people tend to overindulge, whether it be with the spirits or just with food in general. So how can people indulge while not going overboard and then feeling guilt or discomfort?
Yeah, I think planning ahead is so key. This is obviously me as a psychologist not giving recommendation to any person out there. But if you could do a little bit of intermittent fasting, allow your blood sugar level to come back down to a resting place, get some exercise, movement, plan ahead, and then really enjoy that meal when you're with your family, and then mindful eating, making sure that you're checking in with your body, you're not eating too fast or getting so engaged in the moment that you don't realize how much you're drinking or eating, because that's a lot calorically for your body to have to digest. And so really trying to enjoy quality time over just consuming something that's delicious. Another thing is you take a smaller plate and then you immediately just pick smaller items on your plate, and then you have to be aware that you're getting up for your second and third, fifth plate versus one large plate, and you can kind of lie to yourself, or maybe that's just me.
Dr.
Oh, I was just one thing I really wanted to jump in on is we've mostly been centering our discussion on those of us who are fortunate to have a lot of loved ones and spirit around us.
Yeah.
What would you recommend for people who are lonely during the holidays?
I think that it's really important to be friendly. I've moved a ton of places and you have to start over. And so what I've tried to do is put myself out there. For me, I'll find a local church community or a young adults group or something to try to find friends. And then I'll go to the food table because it's an easy place to just like stand and nobody notice that you're by yourself. And then I'll compliment someone and like notice something great about them. I think a lot of us are waiting for people to approach us, and then we feel really alone in a crowd, or you just stay home and you don't try at all. But putting yourself out there in an interest group.
I want to challenge you on that because clearly you're very outgoing. So what would you say to somebody who feels physical discomfort or anxiety,
like social anxiety
in engaging somebody that they don't know?
Yeah, so I think there's meetup groups that can be really beneficial. And then any groups, like I was saying, like a church group where it's more intimate, it's in someone's home, it's small, and then you're just meeting a few people at a time. We have lots of clients at Crawford Clinics with social anxiety, and then we create plans on how you can move forward, because social isolation is a huge factor in anxiety and depression. So we have to get people engaged in healthy relationship. That's one of our first treatment goals when we're working with people, because loneliness is such a factor in depression.
Doctor, one final question for you here. We've been talking a lot about the challenges during the holiday season, but I think not a lot of people talk about the sadness or the disappointment that might come after the holidays. You know, it's such a buildup. You know, you start hearing the Christmas music, you start seeing the lights go up, you start counting down the days until Christmas Day, and then it's all over and it's done. And then there's seasonal depression. The days are short, the nights are long. You see the Christmas lights come down off the streets. How do people handle that? Because then we still have like 3-4 months until we're back to summer.
Oh, I know. That is a really great point. You know, I think the same with vacations as well. We have such a buildup and then the anticlimactic of normal life again, and then it's dark and cold. So a lot of people have started to do like a sabbatical or a time of rest where they envision, okay, what do I dream over the future year? And so you're being intentional to now find something else that gives you vision and purpose. So the more that we can do that, I take the first week, all of my patients know the first week I am not in the office, I am dreaming, I'm envisioning, I'm planning for the future, because I am positive and outgoing. I have to get away from people. And that helps me to now get new energy and motivation toward goals in 2025 versus staying stuck here wishing I was back in Christmas time.
We want to thank you, Dr. Shannon Crawford, for joining us. I personally feel like I've learned a ton, and I encourage our audience to check out her podcast, Unlock You with Dr. Shannon Crawford.